It's a good thing you didn't see the photos. What other photos? I never thought that something as simple as holding someone else's phone could change my life so drastically. That day I had it in my hands and my heart was beating faster than ever. I knew inside there could be ordinary photos, messages, maybe some work notes. But for a split second, I felt that this black rectangle carried something bigger. A secret of hers that I wasn't supposed to know. And the strangest thing was she understood that, too. When I handed her the phone, she looked me straight in the eyes and whispered, "Good thing you didn't see the photos." That phrase haunted me the whole day. Who am I anyway? My name is Thomas Reed. I'm 24. I work in a small company, live in the suburbs, and try to build my life so I don't get swallowed by routine. I'm just an ordinary guy. No fancy cars, no big connections, no loud ambitions. But I've always considered myself observant, someone who notices details. And maybe it was exactly this trait that dragged me into the story I'm telling you now. She lives one floor above me, a beautiful woman about 42, brunette with glasses with a gaze that immediately unsettles you. She always looked confident, but there was also some hidden tension in her. I can't say we ever spoke much. Greetings in the hallway, a few short talks about the weather or the utility bills. That was it. But there was always something. One Saturday, I was leaving my apartment when I noticed a phone lying by the elevator. Plain black smartphone without a case. I picked it up, examined it, and right at that moment, the door upstairs opened. It was her. She saw the phone in my hands and without hesitation came down the stairs. I held it out to her. She took it carefully as if it wasn't just a phone, but something much more valuable. And then she said those words that burned into my memory. "Good thing you didn't see the photos." There was no joke in her voice. No playfulness, only a hidden note, as if she had given me the key to a secret, but slammed the door shut right before me. I stood there completely thrown off, not knowing what to say. She was already walking back upstairs, and I felt I should at least respond. But the words stuck in my throat. The rest of the day, I couldn't shake off the strange feeling. What photos? Why did she say it that way? Quietly, almost like a whisper, yet with such certainty that there was no doubt. I tried to distract myself. Work, a meet-up with friends, an evening walk. But every time her voice echoed in my head again and again. And each time my chest tightened as if I had already been pulled into something I wouldn't be able to step out of so easily. I was 24. She was 42. I didn't know her story, why she lived alone, whether she had family far away. But I knew one thing. From that moment, nothing between us would ever be the same. Because once I picked up a phone I was never meant to touch, and I heard a phrase that turned my ordinary world upside down. After that day, I couldn't look at her the same way. Every time I ran into her on the stairs or by the mailboxes, I felt that same phrase echoing in my head. "Good thing you didn't see the photos." It was like a line from a movie that refuses to fade out. She, on the other hand, behaved as if nothing had happened. Calm, composed, her usual polite smile. But behind those glasses, her eyes seemed to know too much. I wondered if she realized how much she had unsettled me. A few evenings later, I saw her in the courtyard. She was carrying a bag of groceries and one of the handles tore. Apples rolled across the ground. I rushed over instinctively, crouching to pick them up. She laughed softly, brushing her hair back, and said, "You always show up when I need help, don't you?" Her tone was light, but I caught a flicker of something else. I handed her the bag, and for a second, our hands touched, warm, steady. I pulled mine back too quickly, embarrassed at how much that small contact affected me. We ended up walking toward the building together. "Do you always shop alone?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Most of the time," she replied. "It's quieter that way." Then after a pause, but sometimes too quiet, her words lingered in the air. I didn't know if it was an invitation or just an honest confession. Still, it drew me in deeper. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the way she looked at me, the way her voice softened. I thought about the phone again, about the photos she was so worried I might have seen. Were they pictures of her? Of someone she had lost? Or was it something else entirely? The mystery gnawed at me. The next morning, fate decided to test me again. I was heading out for work when I found her sitting on the steps outside the building. She looked tired, as if she hadn't slept either. She smiled faintly when she saw me. "Good timing," she said. "Do you have a minute?" Of course I did. I sat down beside her and she handed me a coffee cup. She'd brought espresso, she joked. We sipped in silence for a while. Then she glanced at me, her expression thoughtful. "You're different from the others here. Most people don't notice or don't care. But you see things." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened. She wasn't wrong. I did notice her maybe more than I should. Before I could answer, she added quietly, "Sometimes that can be dangerous." Those words hit me like a cold wind. I wanted to ask what she meant, but she stood up, brushing off her skirt, and said, "You should get to work. We'll talk another time." I watched her walk away. Every step calculated, graceful, but I could feel the weight she carried. Something about her life was wrapped in shadows. And now, somehow, I had been pulled into them. That evening, when I returned home, I found a small folded note slipped under my door. No name, no signature, just 6 words written in neat handwriting. "Don't ask, just trust me." And I stared at the note for a long time. It had to be from her. But what did it mean? Don't ask about the photos, about her past, about the loneliness she hinted at. All I knew was that my quiet, predictable life had already tilted off its axis. And whether I was ready or not, I was already caught in her orbit. The note stayed on my desk for days. I must have read those 6 words 100 times. Don't ask, just trust me. And they weren't just words. They were a riddle, a warning, and an invitation all at once. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore them. I started noticing her more than ever. The way she lingered on her balcony in the evenings, sipping a glass of wine, staring at the sky as if searching for answers only she could understand. The way she walked through the hallway with quiet confidence, yet always with a shadow behind her eyes. And the way whenever she caught me looking, she'd smile just enough to keep me wondering. One afternoon, I came home early and heard music playing faintly from her apartment above. Jazz, smooth, slow, the kind that fills a room with warmth and longing. On impulse, I stopped halfway up the stairs, listening. Then her door opened. She stood there, surprised to see me, a record sleeve still in her hand. "You like old jazz?" she asked, tilting her head. "I do," I said, though in truth I didn't listen to it often. I just wanted her to keep talking. She hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Come in then, just for a minute." Inside, her place was nothing like mine. Warm light spilled across shelves of books. Framed photos turned just slightly away from view, and that record player spinning softly. The air smelled faintly of vanilla and coffee. Felt like stepping into another world. We sat on the couch a respectful distance apart. She poured me a glass of wine without asking. I held it carefully as if it might betray me. For a while we didn't speak. The music filled the silence between us, and I caught myself studying the curve of her profile, the reflection of the lamp in her glasses, the way her fingers tapped lightly against her glass in rhythm with the music. Finally, she said quietly, "You're curious. I can see it, but curiosity, it can hurt both of us." I didn't answer right away. I wanted to ask about the photos, about the note, about everything she wasn't telling me. But instead I said, "Then why invite me in?" Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Because sometimes silence is heavier than secrets." The room seemed to grow smaller after that. I felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing between us. She looked at me then, not just at me, but through me, as if measuring how much of her world I could carry. Before I could find the courage to speak again, there was a sharp knock at the door. She stiffened, her hand tightening on her glass. "Stay quiet," she whispered. A man's voice called from the hallway, muffled but firm. "Clara Evans, are you there?" I froze. She set her glass down and stood, her movements suddenly tense. "Don't move," she whispered again, then stepped toward the door. She didn't open it. Instead, she leaned against the frame, her body rigid. "I'm busy," she called back, her voice clipped, controlled. There was a pause. Then the footsteps retreated down the hall. Only when the silence returned did she exhale, her shoulders sagging. She turned back to me, her expression unreadable. "You should go," she said softly. I wanted to argue, to ask who that was, why she seemed so afraid. But the look in her eyes told me this wasn't the moment. So I set down my untouched glass and stood. As I reached the door, she touched my arm. Just briefly, but enough to stop me. "Trust me," she whispered again, almost pleading this time. I left her apartment with more questions than answers. My mind racing, my chest tight. I knew I should pull back, that getting closer could only drag me into whatever shadows she carried. But I also knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was already too deep to walk away. For days after that night in her apartment, I couldn't get the sound of that man's voice out of my head. The way she froze, the way her hand trembled ever so slightly when she told me to stay quiet, it was burned into me. Who was he? And why did his presence change her so completely? But more than that, I couldn't forget the moment after her touch on my arm, light as a feather, but heavy enough to anchor me in her storm. "Trust me," she had whispered. I heard those words every time I closed my eyes. The next time I saw her was in the lobby. She looked flawless as always, dressed for work, hair pinned neatly back, glasses perched in place. Yet, there was something different about her expression. Tired maybe, but also softer. When she saw me, she hesitated before walking over. "You've been avoiding me," she said. Not accusing, just observing. "I thought that's what you wanted," I answered honestly. Her lips curved slightly, almost bittersweet. "What I want and what's safe are not the same." We rode the elevator together in silence, the air thick between us. At her floor, she paused before stepping out. "Come by tonight," she said suddenly, not looking at me. "Just don't tell anyone." And then she was gone. That entire day, I couldn't focus on anything else. By the time evening came, I was pacing my apartment like a caged animal. When the clock struck 8, I finally forced myself upstairs. She opened the door immediately, as if she had been waiting on the other side. This time she wasn't in her work clothes. She wore a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, and for the first time she looked less like the untouchable neighbor and more like a woman letting her guard down. "Come in," she said softly. The apartment was dimly lit. Only a lamp by the couch casting a warm glow. A record played faintly in the background. Jazz again. She poured us both tea instead of wine this time. "I don't invite people in," she said after a while, staring at the steam curling from her cup. "It's easier to keep walls up, safer." "But you don't let me," I swallowed, unsure how to respond. The way she said it made it sound less like a complaint and more like an inevitability. "About the other night," I began carefully. "The man who—" Her eyes snapped up, sharp but vulnerable at the same time. "Don't, please, not yet." Her voice cracked on those words. It was the first time I'd seen her break. I nodded, letting it go, though every nerve in me screamed to ask. The silence stretched, heavy but intimate. She leaned back, her gaze drifting toward the window. Outside, the city lights glowed, reflections dancing across her glasses. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, "Do you know what it feels like to be surrounded by people, yet completely unseen?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." She turned back to me, and something passed between us. Something raw and unspoken. For the first time, there was no mystery, no guardedness, just two people carrying loneliness like a hidden scar, recognizing it in each other. I don't know what compelled me, but I reached out and touched her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers curled gently around mine. Her eyes softened and her lips parted as if to say something, but then she stopped. She pulled her hand back slowly, setting her cup down. "It's late," she murmured. "You should go." The dismissal was gentle, but her voice trembled. I stood reluctantly, every part of me wanting to stay. At the door, I looked back. She was still on the couch, staring at her untouched tea, her expression unreadable. "Good night," I said quietly. She didn't answer. When I stepped into the hallway, I realized my chest was tight, my pulse unsteady. She hadn't told me the truth. Not yet. But tonight, She had shown me something even more dangerous herself, and that was enough to keep me coming back, no matter the cost. I told myself I wouldn't go back. That night, after she pulled away, I lay awake for hours, convincing myself it was safer, easier to let the distance grow. But the truth was, distance no longer existed between us. She had let me glimpse behind her walls, and once you see that side of someone, you can't unsee it. The next evening, a storm rolled through, rain lashing against the windows, thunder rattling the glass. I found myself standing at my door, staring at the ceiling above me. I didn't plan it. My feet just carried me there. Before I knew it, I was knocking. She opened the door after a long pause. Her hair was slightly damp, her sweater loose, and behind her, the room was lit only by a single lamp. She looked at me as if she'd expected this. All along. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "I know," I replied, but I couldn't stay away. For the first time, she didn't argue. She stepped aside, letting me in. The storm outside felt distant once the door closed, replaced by the low hum of music playing faintly from her record player. We sat across from each other, the silence thick, but not uncomfortable. Finally, she spoke. "The photos you didn't see," she began, her voice quiet. "They weren't meant for anyone else. They were of me. Moments I kept for myself. Vulnerable ones. Ones I couldn't let anyone judge." Her hands tightened around her cup. "When I realized you had my phone, I panicked. Not because of what you might think of the photos, but because part of me didn't want you to see me that way. And part of me did." The honesty in her voice rooted me to the spot. My chest tightened. "Why me?" I asked. She looked at me, then truly looked through every mask I'd worn. Into every corner I tried to keep hidden. "Because you notice things. Because you see me in a way no one else does. And because when I'm around you, I don't feel invisible." The storm rumbled outside, but the quiet between us was louder. I didn't think I just moved. I reached across the table, taking her hand. This time, she didn't hesitate, her fingers laced with mine, firm and steady. For a long while we said nothing. We just sat there holding on, listening to the storm. And in that silence, everything I'd been carrying spilled out, not in words, but in the way I held her hand as if it was the only anchor I had. Finally, she leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you like me, Thomas Reed?" It was the question I'd felt hanging between us since the beginning. Simple yet devastating. I could have played it safe. I could have laughed it off. But something about the way she asked, the vulnerability in her eyes, left no room for lies. "Yes," I said. My voice shook, but it was the truest thing I'd ever spoken, more than I should. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, soft, almost trembling. She squeezed my hand, then don't let go. We sat there until the storm faded, until the city lights glowed through the thinning clouds. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or who that man at her door had been, or what other secrets she carried. Maybe I never would, but I knew this in that moment. She wasn't the untouchable neighbor, the mystery with shadows in her eyes. She was simply a woman who wanted to be seen, and I was the one who saw her.